All right, folks. So is Morrow truly an anti-hero? Are the ticks acting off brand with their intelligence? Are we getting a tease of an impending fight between two of our creature species? Plus a new guest host this week. All of that and more on a brand new Game Over. Stay tuned. All right, good evening to those of you on the East Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to Game Over, the Alien Earth podcast, the show in which we, that is myself and my guest hosts each week, dissect the episodes of this first season of Alien Earth. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, and you know how things go when we're doing these breakdowns. But if you aren't aware, I'm going to go into a brief, a recap of the said episode this week, that being episode 5, which is titled In Space No One, ellipsis. But I will, as I said, go into a recap. After I finish the recap, I will introduce our guest hosts this said week. And once I've introduced our guest hosts, I will get into, or I should say, we will get into some themes, some analysis of the episode, as well as some theories that we may have going forward, being that we do have, we're more than halfway through this season with the understanding that we have 8 episodes in this first season of Alien Earth, hopefully one of many, many more to come. But with that out of the way, I'm going to dive right into our recap. But I will remind you guys, if you are watching this episode live, thank you guys so much if you are. However, if you catch us after we've aired live, just know that this episode will be time-stamped accordingly based on whatever part of the episode that you're interested in, based on our analysis, on theories, things like that. So you'll be able to skip forward or rewind to your heart's content. So just keep that in mind. So without further ado, I'm going to get into our recap. Give me one moment. And of course, it goes without saying that spoilers are ahead. All right, so this week, the focus of our show is episode 5, as I said, In Space No One. And we begin this week's episode on the Maginot, 17 days before its arrival on Earth, as Morrow is being awakened by a Maginot crew member to find that things have slowly unraveled in his brief time in cryosleep, as 2 of members of the crew, one of whom being the captain, have been incapacitated by face huggers. One of which is still actively on a crew member's face, that being Bronsky, the other dead, that being the captain, thanks to a failed removal attempt. What follows is an exposition dump with many of our crew members, 2 of the main ones being our science officer Chibizo and medical officer Rahim, sharing that the face huggers, that their containment units were opened and that a fire was started on the vessel. Eventually, it's decided per company protocol to place the face hug crew member, that being Bronsky, in cryo, while the others are provided with new respective objectives to deal with their current problem. To make matters worse, besides the well-being of the crew member still face hugged, more is shared with Morrow, that is by way of one of the engineers, that the ship's systems have been compromised, which likely will cause the ship to soon crash on Earth versus landing safely on it. Elsewhere in the lab, housing the smaller creatures, we find Chibizo and Rahim checking on the smaller specimens, a decision that, in hindsight, will set an entire cascade of dominoes in motion, resulting in the deaths of many on the ship. But more on that later. As the situation is occurring, Morrow and executive member Zaverny, freshly minted as the new captain, argue over the next necessary steps to deal with their situation. Shortly after their interaction, Morrow heads to the containment area housing the larger creatures and investigates the area. After inspecting the creatures, or I should say after inspecting the grounds, he continues his investigation by combing through surveillance, piecing together how the two crew members were face hugged earlier, and also confirming a speculated relationship mentioned to him by a crew member with Zaverny and Bronsky. Additionally, though he's not able to immediately identify the person responsible for the fire, he is able to make out someone seemingly committing the acts of supposed sabotage. Elsewhere on the ship, the new captain watches on as her fellow crew members place the facehug crew member Bronsky into cryo in the hopes that he can be put on ice until they're able to treat him. However, as they all disperse, it is shown that the facehugger has other plans as it rides on Bronsky's face, indicating that it is still planning to carry out its intended job. As Morrow continues his investigation, Captain Zaverny inquires mother about their situation, an inquiry which ultimately reveals to her Yutani's ruthless motives. Meanwhile, back in his quarters, Morrow reminisces about his life on Earth, confirming the existence of his daughter mentioned in a prior episode. However, through this quiet moment in his quarters, it is also revealed that his daughter has unfortunately passed away in his time being on the Maginot. Later on, the engineer shares more bad news that the ship's condition has worsened, further confirming the likelihood of their ship crashing on Earth. However, before they can consider any solutions to this matter, an alarm directs them back to the cryopod housing the aforementioned face-hugged crew member Bronsky. Upon arriving at his pod, they find a hole in his chest and on the glass of the pod, indicating that something broke out of the unfortunate crew member and is now loose on the vessel. Elsewhere in the lab, Chibizo continues her study of the alien ticks and the Tiacellus, while their team effort between the tick and the Tiacellus results in a nasty surprise left for her in her water by the alien tick. However, before she can drink it, she is interrupted by her colleague regarding the event mentioned earlier regarding the escaped facehugger. Ultimately, despite not succumbing to what was left by the tick, the interruption, as you can see here, does cause the lack of securement of the Tiacellus' container, which of course provides it the window that it needs to escape. Back in the mess hall of the ship, all of the remaining crew members gather as Zaverny shares her updated objectives with the xenomorph now loose on the ship. Additionally, picking up from the situation in the lab, the mechanics apprentice, or I should say the engineer's apprentice, drinks Chibizo's water, sealing his fate. As Morrow's suspicions continue, or I should say intensify with the crew, the engineer's apprentice has some unexpected indigestion that violently results in him losing consciousness and eventually being brought back to the mid bay of the ship to be treated. Meanwhile, following an interrogation of Mr. Tang, Morrow is able to surmise that the saboteur in question is none other than an engineer named Petrovich. Now bestowed with this revelation, he locates the other crew members to warn them. However, he finds them treating the said apprentice back in the med bay. And once reconnecting with them to their discuss, Chibizo as well as Raheem discover that the apprentice has been infested with ticks that have been draining him of blood from the inside out. In their efforts to remove the ticks inside the apprentice, the ticks release a gas that kills both Chibizo and Raheem. And following the incident, Morrow takes over as leader of the ship and provides new directives to the remaining crew. As they set out to execute these objectives, Morrow and his fellow security officer encounter Petrovich, an encounter which results in Morrow's fellow security subordinate's demise, but also results in Petrovich's defeat at the hands of Morrow. Elsewhere, Zaverny finds herself in the crosshairs of the xenomorph and narrowly escapes its clutches, only to find herself in the crosshairs of the Tiacellus shortly thereafter. Before the Tiacellus is able to continue its attack, it's interrupted by Morrow intervening, causing it to switch its tactics by not only calling the xenomorph to the proceedings, but also attacking it instead of Zaverny. What follows is a retrace of what occurred back in episode 1 as Morrow barricades himself in the emergency stasis pod. Afterwards, we find Morrow at Yutani's headquarters, flashing forward to present setting of our show, speaking to Yutani herself as he convinces her to allow him to kill Kavalier and to get her creatures back. And with that, that brings us to the end of episode 5, In Space No One. And with that, I'm also going to introduce our guest this week. Today's guest is an actor as well as producer known for his work in the series VEEP, as well as the indie horror favorite, The Night Watchman. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Dan Franko. Let me bring him on now. Dan, hello. How you doing, man?
Good. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, incredible episode that we had here. Pretty wild one. It was always an episode I was looking forward to see what had finally happened on the Maginot. I had a kind of an inkling that we would get a flashback episode like this. What were your initial impressions of the episode without getting into details? We'll say that for the review at the end.
Yeah, it was like this was Alien. This was the original 70s, 77, 78 Alien on the ship running from the monster, but so many more monsters, like
right.
Just leveled up. So it definitely felt like, this show has been fantastic. But everything down on Earth has been a different view of this world. And so this was something that was very, very familiar and very, very in keeping with, and even down to the art direction and the technology and people smoking in the damn ship, in the future, which you would think wouldn't happen, but because that was what they established in the original movie, they've continued that through, and I think that's just the overall production and design and approach to it has been amazing.
For sure, and I had initial impressions too. I kind of second our one of our comments here to see if that was it. Yeah, I know a lot of people enjoyed this episode, but I found it incredibly frustrating, cartoonish. Not that intense, mind you, but there were some components where I was like, really, like we're still doing this in Alien, where I was like, come on, like we got to do better, y'all. Like the production values, as you said, are top notch. A lot of the characters that we have there and the arcs that we're seeing with the characters, especially with Morrow, gives us a whole new perspective of where he's coming from, because up to this point he very much seemed like an antagonistic character. And after looking at this episode, it gives you a new perspective of different layers to what drives him as a character and what he's dealing with, what baggage he's dealing with. So it shines him in a different light, which I'm happy about, because I felt kind of conflicted about how much I liked him as a character. So yeah. I'm like, but he's a bad guy. So
he is, but he's I feel like he's the actor's name is Babu Cisse, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
He's amazing. He's landing this thing somewhere in that, like, Tyrion Lannister, Peter Dinklage, right there with Cranston, because this is a character that has, he's so minimal. He isn't doing too much, and it's so subtle, and I just love I love the work he's doing. It's phenomenal.
And it's not the first project that I've seen him in. Like, there was a project where I was like, who is this actor? And he was in that show too, and he played an antagonist. It was in I don't know if you ever watched the show Into the Badlands, but if for anyone out there who hasn't seen it, incredible show. If you like, martial arts, action, incredible choreography, but it has an interesting dystopian premise of what the world looks like in this post-apocalyptic era, where it incorporates a lot of martial arts and things like that. So I highly recommend it. But he was a character that popped up in those final seasons of that series, and every scene that he was in, he stole the scene of. So even among all the other ensemble actors that had been on the show for years and years, I was like, who is this character? Who is this guy?
And even calling back to, like I was saying, the original Alien, he also is very just his presence and his on film is very Yaphet Kotto like. I mean,
Yes.
very
Yeah.
similar as performers.
For sure, for sure. So, getting into the analysis or thematic part, if you will, with this show, is one thing that has come to mind with me in looking at this episode, and it's popped up elsewhere, but it comes to mind again here, is the idea of biological family versus adoptive family. We have a lot of instances and examples of that, whether we're talking about from what's revealed about Morrow, with Morrow and Utani, like the the grandmother, the original Utani, what we have with Kavalier and the Lost Boys,
Right.
and then on the biological end of Morrow and his daughter, of Wendy and Joe. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I find it's been fascinating to observe that, of how the ties with the adoptive family can potentially lead to ruin, it seems like, in the show, versus the biological one, where that is more connected with the character's humanity and bypassing a lot of the more disastrous decisions that they make, as characters.
Well, it obviously feels like the biological connections are what's going to tear this things apart, because that's how he's leveraging Simply to is it Simply slightly
Yeah.
to
Sing. Yeah.
to get him to do what he wants to do there. And then Joe, the other Lost Boys are jealous that she gets to have the connection to her prior life and they don't. And then just I think and then Joe has just been this sort of like, when you let her kind of reconnect to that life, it's going to tear apart her involvement in what's going on here on the island.
For sure. And even outside of that, have there been any, components of this episode? I want to be able to give you the floor. Have there been any things that have popped up, not just in this episode, or maybe it is specifically in this episode thematically, that has intrigued you thus far?
I think obviously, I mean, they're talking about the lack of trust of the government, and
Sure.
we're going through some crazy stuff right now, and it's always kind of like Andor and this and the shows, Daredevil, the shows that are able to tap into, even though they wrote these scripts a year and a half ago before all this stuff was going on. It's really wild how present and prescient they are with the themes that are going on in our world. And then obviously, like, the corporate greed, Boy Kavalier was the one behind the saboteur and working to make sure that ship came down in his territory so that he could get the samples and the creatures and things like that. So, it's the classic, the ambition and greed are what's going to do everybody in, because obviously we know how this is going to end. We know bad things are going to happen to Boy Kavalier. I don't know which animal is going to get him. But
I have an idea of what it is.
Yeah.
But I do have a very strong indication of what it is, because it works perfectly, in terms of what he shared as a character. But I'm sorry, continue. We'll save that for the theory part. But I
just want to say, though, that, okay, Disney, you own FX now. You own Fox. You own all the Alien stuff. And there was no reason to do that to Mike Wazowski. That is rude. That is uncalled for. I have in my notes here, this Mike Wazowski MFer, like, and not only that, they put it on top of a damn octopus, and it's doing Spider-Man double pull back so it can fling itself across the room. That is terrifying. I mean, the alien world on its own has enough that is scary. The xenomorphs, the face huggers, and the small ones that pop out of the chest. That's enough. We don't need the leeches, and which to me always brings me back to, every time I've seen them so far, one of the first things that scared the hell out of me as a kid in you probably Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, the things they put in the helmet that went in Chekhov's ear.
Sure, crazy,
terrifying. And so this so they pulled those in. They turned Mike Wazowski evil. There's this plant. I don't even know what's going to happen with that plant. I
still don't know what it does. Still don't know. So frustrating. I'm like, come on. I was waiting for this episode for it to show, but I'm sure they'll see it. I guess it'll have its time to shine in the upcoming episode.
So, but yeah, but this little eyeball running around is really disturbing. It's so, but good on them. I mean, they've taken the world that was already given to them, and they've expanded it so far with this terrifying shit. You know? Like,
yes, yeah, for sure. And we had a comment there. It says, "I'm convinced that the Eye has a wife before the final form. Both of them these." Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. Like in observing, one thing, regardless of how folks may fall, because I know it's been kind of mixed on each end, how people have felt about the show thus far, and it's been fascinating with each of you hosts that have come each week, and where they've fallen, because everyone has fallen in a different area. You know, some have been very supportive of a lot of the things that have come and that have been introduced, and others have been a bit against it. And I mean, I feel like I'm kind of in the middle ground where, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, is that I do appreciate the fact that they're not resting on their laurels of what has been done before with the Alien lore and with the Alien franchise thus far. Good on them for regardless of how people may feel about it, of showing new aspects of things that we are familiar with, like with the face hugger and that what they demonstrated with the embryo. Like up to this point, we never really knew that that existed within the face hugger, of artificially being able to recreate that process of what happens when when someone is face hug, and the chest burster and all of that. But also, good on the show creator, on Noah, to be able to say, folks are familiar enough with the aliens, and don't get me wrong, the aliens are scary, and they're able to hybridize with other species, and that makes them also scary. But we need to be able to kind of recreate that visceral feeling that people had with the first Alien by introducing these new aliens that people are not familiar with. And, to what, credit of what you're saying, the fact that we still don't truly know the ins and outs of how they operate is what makes those creatures, scary or terrifying. And that they play on different types of fears. Like with the eye creature, you could arguably say, it's about the idea of not having control of one's body, of being commandeered, so to speak, and having something take you over. And then with some of the other creatures,
and with the eyeball, it's clearly not just an animal working off of instinct. It's got a plan. It's plotting and playing chess,
which makes it even scarier. Whenever you have something that is intelligent. I mean, a good example of that, if we're really backtracking with even Jurassic Park, what makes the raptors so scary is because they are intelligent, not because of all the other things they're capable of. The intelligence is what also makes it scary. So it will be interesting to see how a lot of those things progress. So because I'm chomping at the bit to get to this, and you already got me there going into theories. So you said that you have an inkling that something will happen to Kavalier. I already have a suspicion of how it's going to happen, but I'm curious to know. I'm going to punt it over to you and see if you're on the same wavelength of what I'm thinking of what's going to happen with him.
So there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of potential. Obviously Morrow wants to be the one that kills him, so there's that on the table. That eyeball was eyeing him up. What did you say it was called?
Teocellus.
Teocellus. So that thing was definitely interested. I don't think it would be as compelling or interesting if just one of the xenomorphs just gets him and kills him. That's just going to be kind of basic, or maybe we finally get to find out what the plant does. But I think Morrow is going to be the one, and I think it's going to be, obviously I feel like Morrow and Kirsch are heading toward showdown, because Kirsch kind of is on to him, and I think is going to be there and ready. So he's going to have to go through Kirsch to get to Kavalier, I think.
Okay, all right. So I mean, and I mentioned this at the even back, give you guys an opportunity, even back at episode 1 and 2 that we covered, is that I always had, when we're talking about all these creatures, out of all the creatures that we have outside of the xenomorph, one creature that I had making it out of season 1 is this Teocellus creature. And the reason being is that I feel like it's too good of an opportunity to pass up to utilize the abilities that it has. It has the abilities to be able to infiltrate, because it basically can take over whatever host it kills. And so there's too big of an opportunity based on what has already been established. We know that there's 5 corporations. I don't feel like they're going to have enough time to get into the other 3 corporations. I feel like this season is specifically just going to be between Prodigy and Yutani. And I feel like the other 3, the way that they'll be able to bring the other 3 corporations into play is in the aftermath of what happens in this season, because we know, based off of what was shared by Joe, that the new landscape of how their world works is that we have these 5 corporations that control everything. So what happens when one of these main powers are destroyed? Then there's a power vacuum, and now, it's basically chaos of them trying to claim everything of this, destroyed corporation. So I feel like in the aftermath, or in the chaos of that the Teocellus is somehow going to commandeer somebody and somehow get its way into an executive team member, whether we're talking about a Kavalier, or if Morrow is able to carry out his mission of killing, a Kavalier, it could even go into Ainz, the assistant, and Ainz could go on to perhaps join one of the other corporations. But because he's in a kind of executive position, he's from what it appears, a second in charge, right behind Kavalier at Prodigy, that he may find a way to infiltrate into one of the other corporations as the Teocellus somehow.
Gotcha.
So, because I like I said, it just seems like too good of a cliffhanger to not show that the creature got away, and that it got away within somebody.
Yeah.
So I could just picture that as a lot of times when they have those montages where they're trying to set up, threads for a new season, that they would not do that. But you mentioned Morrow. What are your thoughts on where he lies? Do we feel like he's a straight up villain, or do you feel like he's more in that anti-hero space in terms of
I don't feel that he's a villain. He was doing what he was directed to do. It's a very cold thing, but he was following orders, which, not great orders, but
yeah.
They were all probably going to be dead anyway. So, he's trying to do what he said he would do for the corporation. He's lost what's connected him to Earth. He's, like I said, he's given 65 years to this corporation, and he's going to see it through. And then I think what's driving him is that Kavalier came through with his corporate espionage and messed everything up for them. This guy, this saboteur came in and let everything loose, and now, this is the result. And so he's going to make sure he pays for it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There are a lot of things that a lot of questions that are raised. As I said, this episode, in a very fascinating way, has kind of retconned within the season itself, because up to this point we felt like we knew who this character was, and then
Right.
with this episode, it kind of turns it on its head. So one thing that I would say that I am also curious about: do we really believe that the daughter is dead? Because we know how manipulative that Utani can be, and perhaps in knowing how Morrow would react by not having any ties of any kind, of him being, if you can get rid of the one thing, kind of similar to what we're seeing again with the current characters, when the adoptive family is trying to get rid of those biological ties,
Right.
they know that they have a means of being able to manipulate that said character. So they could have easily lied and said that, you know, she passed away or something happened to her, only to find out later that she was alive the entire time. Like, I
Right.
feel like that would be an awesome opportunity for them to have going forward. I don't know what you think on something like that, of them trying that.
I don't know. I think that you know, you risk at that point kind of the because you've already got all these, you know, the Sings have gotten their kid back that they thought was dead. Joe has gotten his sister back who he thought was dead. It almost becomes, does that become too
Oh,
much of the
yeah,
same?
repetitive. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. And I think we had something here. It says, for Morrow, I find it interesting if he found out Utani was responsible for the death of his daughter in the fire. That too, that was
Yeah.
another thing I was thinking. Like
So
that would even be even more tragic.
So now after he takes help with Kavalier, he turns it back on Utani.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, who knows? I guess we'll see, you know, going forward. But a lot of interesting questions raised with this character. Another thing that I did want to be able to dive into is with some of the other aliens that we have, and this is kind of going to is going to bleed into my review, but I wanted to, you know, get your thoughts on it. Do we feel that there are other creatures that have yet to demonstrate their level of intelligence? Because up to this point, like, which was really surprising, we never really counted on these ticks to be as intelligent as they were.
Right.
We kind of already already kind of had an indication of that with the Teocellus, and there's even descriptions of it when they when what's his name, Kirsch, was studying it, that they actually had notes on that creature stating how intelligent it was. But your thoughts on the other creatures that we've yet to see, and their level of intelligence?
I don't. You know, I obviously that was from what we had seen up to this episode. The ticks just seemed like basic
Yeah,
crawlies, you know, that
right,
suck your
right.
blood. But obviously they were scheming. They figured out how to open the container and get out and lay a booby trap. So that was kind of awful. But yeah, so I mean, all we got left is the you know, and I think we've seen enough of the xenomorph. They have some intelligence, but they're basically just run and kill, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It was interesting to me that the TSLS, when it was in the man, charged the alien. It was like, let's go.
Right, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it feels like, and I could be wrong about this, but it feels like they are foreshadowing something with this,
Yeah.
where we might have, they're teasing an actual confrontation that we might get later between these two species. So, you know, I'm very curious. Maybe somehow it will commandeer one of the other creatures to team up against the xenomorph. Since it's discovered that, you know, if I commandeer a human, that's not really going to go my way if I try to take down a xenomorph.
Commandeers a synth, then it might go its way. And Bath Time makes a great point that the eye creature is very similar to Wendy. Both of them kind of riding a body that isn't theirs, you know, and kind of so yeah, I think that's a great point.
For sure. And I mean, who knows, that they, perhaps it will finally somehow collaborate with Nibs, who already seems to have some PTSD when it comes to that creature. They already have some type of connection. somehow maybe that will make her vulnerable enough where it will be able to take over a synthetic, which would be really scary if it's able to do that, considering the capabilities that that these not synthetics but hybrids have.
And then as all this is coming together, obviously you've also got the piece where this little experiment on Neverland, even if there weren't creatures going on, is coming apart.
It is.
The one I can't remember her name, the redheaded girl.
Nibs. It's Nibs.
Nibs is losing her shit and coming unglued, and that's going to be an issue. And Slightly is having an issue with what Wendy get, and obviously Curly too. There, Wendy gets special treatment. They don't appreciate that, and I think it's pulling itself apart. And we know from Aliens, which takes place after, this technology doesn't seem to be, when you retcon something, you also have to stay within the boundaries that have been established. They're not there because we still have a synth. We still have Lance
Bishop.
Yeah. He's a regular synth. So that's the technology that continues, not these. So this is going to fall apart, and they're either going to all die or all just disperse into the world and live their lives as the people they're pretending to be. So,
and then it's funny you bring that up, and I didn't even think of this, but that may be telling the story right there of what I was talking about with the power vacuum of what's claimed from Prodigy, because it's shown to us at the beginning of this series that a lot of these corporations, they specialize in certain aspects, certain types of technology. And it's not really, even though up to this point, when we think of the Alien franchise, we've known synthetics to be a part of Yutani. When they describe these, these organizations, that isn't something that they are highlighted as being kind of the pioneers of. It's Prodigy that's given kind of that moniker. And so it begs the question, does something happen to these hybrids, as you said, and they take over whatever's left of the research with the synthetics based off of what transpires on this show, since it is taking place prior to the first Alien. So lots of fascinating possibilities for sure. But if we were to get into, and I'm going to bring this up here, I think you'll appreciate this. If we were to get into the Jonesy of it all, if you will, what would be your review in this segment that we have of keeping up with the Joneses, of considering our 5 cats being a perfect episode and trickling down to good being 4, 3 being average? What are your thoughts on what we have here with episode 5, In Space No One?
Probably give it 4.5 Jonesies. I thought it had great pacing. It definitely had you had kind of had this parallel thing happening with the investigation and then also the horror movie. And I thought it balanced those really well and gave us a lot into the characters that were on the ship who we only got a brief glimpse of right at the jump. And so no, I thought it was a really, really great episode. The performances, the Fear, the lady, the Dame Sylvia, when she was when Nibs was coming at her, just the terror that she was going through, and I think this cast is great. I love what Oliphant's doing. So yeah, I'd say 4.5.
Cool, awesome. So I'm not going to go as severe as our friend here.
Yeah, I see
that. Two out of 5. I'm not going to go that severe. I would say 4 for sure for me. It would have been a perfect episode, but bear with me, small rant. If we're talking about the Alien franchise, one thing that has always irked me about this franchise, and don't get me wrong, I love it, which is another reason why it irks me and why I'm passionate about it, is what we have happened with a lot of our human characters and the decisions that they make. And we have a lot of characters in this said franchise that are in the medical field. And in being in the medical field, you would assume that they would have certain precautions in place
Yeah.
or have certain protocols in place of how they operate, especially when they're dealing with situations that they are not accustomed to. When they're going to a planet in an environment that they are not accustomed to, when they're exposing themselves to creatures that they still don't fully know what they're capable of, and to not use gloves, not to use masks, not to have any type of like
Yeah.
covering, not to have any type of disinfectant for the room, to get rid of any type of airborne things that may become issues, or even, and this drove me up the wall, which the idea of bringing food in a medical space in a lab. And I'm like, it's a lab. It's supposed to be something where, you're dealing with infectious diseases. In this case, you're dealing with alien creatures that you don't really know what they can do, whether they're alive or dead. Anything can happen in terms of their biology that could, contaminate what
Yeah.
you're eating and what you're drinking, and you bring it in there. And I understand she gave a reason as to why she did that, because of that creepy character Tang, and not really wanting to eat with him or something. But you still can't convince me why you are making the decisions that you're making. And it's hard to buy you having the occupation that you have when you're making those types of decisions. And
Right.
so a lot of the things that make things like that make things scary is when, despite the circumstances, despite all the precautions that are brought into play, that you're still kind of up the creek of what you're dealing with. Like a good example of that would be, what is it, Romulus, that was a recent installment. I'm assuming you've seen it.
I haven't seen
uh,
that one yet. I'll
oh,
tell
okay.
you why in a second.
All right. So without going into spoilers, I'll just say this, is that I appreciate the type of characters that we have. And because of the type of characters that we have, the type of occupations that they have, it makes sense that they would make the decisions that they make. And a lot of the decisions that they make too, I feel like in a real life situation, they would have made those same decisions. And because you've established that, okay, they're this age, they have this type of job, you buy the circumstances that they're placed in and how they react to it. But when you're placed in a situation where we're talking about corporate medical officers, and they're supposed to be at the top of their field and being able to study a lot of these creatures, like eventually, after 50 years, because believe it or not, it has been nearly 50 years of this franchise, that we would have characters that would behave in a way that would make more sense based on their occupation. So because of that, that
But
brought
are
an
they?
answer for to me.
But are they the top of their game? The top of their game medical person might still be at a hospital on Earth, not on a freighter cruising the seas. They might not be the best of the best and cut a little. I don't know. I agree. I get what you're
Yes,
saying.
I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying, but when we're talking about a corporation that has the type of resources that Utani has, regardless of whether they're the top of their game or not, if they have the money and the resources to buy all of this equipment and to buy all these resources and to send ships out for 65-year trips to various places to bring back all of these specimens, I would think that they would have things in place, protocols, just as they said, protocols in place and equipment that they could use to more safely uh, protect their employees in order to, allow them to get back. And I know that they've demonstrated that they don't really care that much for their employees, but at least the bare minimum, or at least have the staff to wear, just the basic equipment that you would have, whether it's gloves or masks. Because I mean, at one point, which was insane to me, the doctor, if memory serves, and I could look at it again, I could be wrong about this, he had taken a swig of his drink while he was operating
Yeah.
on the guy with the ticks. I'm like, What is happening?
Well, he was smoking in the medical lab too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that too.
there's a level of yeah, I get what you're saying. What I
But
did like was
go ahead.
that, you know, like you had in Alien when the guy's got the face hugger when with
Yeah,
John Hurt, right?
yeah,
He's got the
yeah,
face
yeah.
hugger. He's been infected, and Ripley's like, "No, he can't come on the ship. That's protocol." And she's like, "That is protocol." And I remember during COVID, everyone was like, "If we would have just listened, stayed inside, stayed away from the people who were infected, we'd no." But on this one, they did follow protocol. They put him in cryo. It didn't work though, you know, obviously. Which I'm curious, wasn't that so? So here's my thing. Alien,
Yeah.
loved my first horror movie in a theater was Aliens.
Okay.
That was, you know, I had seen like Poltergeist, but that was on video at home.
Okay.
So that was the first movie, a scary movie that I saw in a theater with a
Gotcha.
crowd, all that stuff,
Yeah.
and loved it. So then I went back and went back to Alien and watched that, then watched Aliens again a ton of times. I just didn't like Alien 3. It just lost me. I didn't like where they went with the character. I didn't enjoy the movie, and I kind of just walked away from the series at that point. So I didn't
Yeah.
see 4 or any of the Prometheus or
Oh wow. Okay.
so, but I understand that Romulus is more like this. So I'm going to go back and check out Romulus, and probably go back and check. I've wanted to check the one with Fassbender, so I'll probably see that.
So I will tell you, if because you say you have not seen any of the prequels, right? Up to now, you have
Right,
since then.
right.
Okay. So with the prequels, with what is it, with Prometheus and with Covenant, if you're going to go see Romulus, you can see Romulus without seeing those, but I feel like you will have a better experience watching Romulus if you have seen those.
Gotcha.
Because there are a lot of Easter eggs in those that come from that, and you would have. I feel like you would have a more. That's the word I'm looking for. A more fulfilling watching Romulus if you've seen those two movies. Don't have to, but it makes it a better viewing experience.
Awesome.
So I would say outside of that, and speaking of what you're talking about, I have seen 3. I've seen both cuts of it because they have another cut of it of Alien 3 where I guess the alien comes from a different host. I know in the original cut, it came from a dog, and in the other cut, I want to say it was like a bull or a cattle or something. It's still the same idea that it's a quadruped, but it comes from like I said, a different animal. There are some other components with subplots that allow the movie to flow a lot better. So I would definitely suggest, to check out the other cut that they have of Alien 3, because I do like the other cut versus the theatrical cut. Alien 4 is a lot of fun. There's a lot of things that are kind of like feel like they're wonky about it, but I can appreciate, how fun it is and what they do with the Ripley character. Similarly with this, which is why I gave it a 4, is that it would have been perfect for me had they not had that issue that I mentioned before. But what allowed it to still be a 4 is that if this was released theatrically, I could see myself, vicariously, watching this film and seeing other moviegoers enjoy this film,
Yeah.
and watch it and talking to the screen throughout the entire episode. Like I could see a lot of those things, especially the sequence that was in the lab where people will probably be like, oh no,
Yeah.
we're not doing that. No. So I mean, I feel like there were a lot of instances like that throughout this episode where I feel like people would have been talking to the screen, and those are always fun experiences when you have a very reactive audience that are always like talking and reacting to things that they're seeing.
That was happening in my room in my living room last night when the eyeball was flinging itself to get the container to fall.
Oh no, it wasn't that.
Nope. No, thank you.
It wasn't that. It was what was before. You know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to keep it PG here of what I'm talking about. What happened before when Acellus was trying to distract our doctor from what was happening in her, in her water. So
Yeah.
Because I could see that being like a huge moment where people would be, if it was theatrically released, where people would have a huge reaction there.
Yeah.
So even in the moment that they kind of played with the audience of who was going to finally drink the water, because they kept going, they
There were a
kept
lot.
having,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
that was a fun gag where they were trying to play with the expectation of who you thought was going to actually finally succumb to that fate. So, but the thing that's crazy about that is ultimately she still did succumb to those same ticks because
Yeah.
of the gas that happened later. So
Right.
even if she didn't drink it, she still ended up dying at their hand anyway at the long run.
And think about this. So the ship crashed, and there's at least what 8 ticks that came out of that body that just went running off. So they're around somewhere in New
Yeah.
Siam. You know, like
And
just
we don't know if they got those bodies back. Did they take those bodies back that were left on that ship? Did they take all of them, or did they just take a few of them
right.
and just left the others there? So, because if not, if they didn't take all of them, as you said, we do have one body there that we know got commandeered
Yeah.
after those ticks left the apprentice. So we'll see. But that's going to do it here on Game Over. Dan, as always, man, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Can you tell folks where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at danfranco11, Franco with a K. I've got a short film that's out right now called Invasion 53. It's a really cool, like 1950s sort of invasion of the blob, invasion of the body snatchers. It came, that kind of thing. It just played at Comic-Con a couple months ago. It's in festivals all over the place, Kentucky. So you can find it on Facebook, Invasion 53. We're going to be at Fright Reads next weekend in Howard County, Maryland, which is Fright Reads Book Fest. That's the 13th and 14th. And then if you're in Maryland or in the Mid-Atlantic area somewhere in January, I don't have the dates yet, I'm actually going to be playing Macbeth. So,
okay, and we actually have a question here. Let's see. Said, do we need to see all of that? So,
nice.
But
it's apostrophe 53, so it's the date. So it's a period piece.
Awesome stuff. So, as mentioned before, thanks again to Dan for hopping on this week as our guest host. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, co-creator of Movies and Shakers Unlimited. You can find me at Brandon Troy ENT on X, and then Brandon Troy _ ENT on Instagram. And also, I want to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for those that are Patreon supporters, and just know that you can be one too, with nice features that we have with each of the tiers. Put the link just below here if you want to be a Patreon supporter. But other than that, as I said, thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and see you guys soon. Later.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.